Move this up there. Oh, 10 people. That's okay.
Actually, while we're waiting for people to come in, why don't I go ahead and I can at least talk a little bit about Straw Dog and the upcoming events, because that's something we always like to do. So let me welcome you to this presentation about book cover design for writers. We'll get to the program in just a minute, but this is a program of the Straw Dog Writers Guild, and we're a regional writing organization in Western Massachusetts, although we increasingly have members from all over the country. And we do some online events and face-to-face events. Our upcoming events include, somewhere I've got these. So today we're doing book cover design for writers. On Tuesday, we're going to be doing the writer submission study hall. And so that's an opportunity to get together and talk about the submission process and actually trying to get things submitted. Wednesdays is the weekly writing group. There's a face-to-face group that meets in Dalton, and I run an online Zoom writing group where we write for two 45-minute sessions and have a little bit of socialization in between. Writers' Night in June is coming up at the Longmeadow Adult Center on June 26th. There are poetry critique meetups, and it looks like there's one on Saturday and on Sunday, the 28th and 29th. And then Writers' Night Out in July is on the 1st. So there's a whole series of events coming up, and I encourage you to go look at our calendar and see what those are. And since it's now 2 after, now without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Rachel Rosen, who's our speaker for today. Rachel Rosen is an activist, graphic designer, and somehow also amazingly a high school teacher. She's the author of the Sleep of Reason series, and her newest book, Blight, is just out. She's also the co-author of the Sad Bastard Cookbook, Food You Can Make So You Don't Die, which, if you haven't seen it, is an amazing resource for anyone trying to eat under the financial and temporal constraints of living in the post-capitalist hellscape we currently find ourselves in. I first started interacting with Rachel in the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association Discord, where I saw her trying to help new authors understand the issues and intricacies around the importance of book covers for selling fiction. I had learned some of these lessons painfully myself when I'd first published my books, and I thought Straw Dog members might find her insights helpful. And so without further ado, please take it away, Rachel.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Morgan and the Straw Dogs for hosting. I'm really excited to be here. So as Stephen said, I'm a teacher, graphic designer, author, podcaster. I'm coming to you from Toronto. And my graphic design work is all freelance these days. So I used to do this professionally full time, and now I'm lucky enough that I have a day job and I can just concentrate on what I love most, which is book cover design. Those are my 2 books in the Sleep of Reason series. I design my own cover. One of my missions in life is to tell authors that they probably shouldn't do that. So these are some of my other covers that I've done for clients. Most of my clients are small to medium-sized presses and indie writers. Every genre. I am not a snob. I will do anything. And these are just some of the ones that have been the most fun to work on. So I want to start off, and I'm hopefully going to be able to see the chat, but if not, if somebody can just read out any questions or feedback. So this is with the permission of the author, what I think is a terrible cover for a really great book. So what I would like to hear from you is what you think the book is about and who you think the audience for this book is. If you know, keep it quiet for a second. I don't know where the chat is. I'm sorry. Any guesses?
I can't see it. Where is it being displayed?
Oh, just on the right-hand side. I know, you can barely see it, right?
I don't see it either. I don't see chat anywhere.
Okay, cool.
It says a back cover for a book I love. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so in the chat, I'm seeing...
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah. I have no idea, and a poetry chapbook. Poetry would also be my guess. It is not poetry.
Possibly a memoir.
Nature memoir. Okay. It is a YA book. The plot is basically there's a 12-year-old boy whose father absolutely loses his mind after September 11th and builds a small nuclear device, which he hides in a garden gnome and puts in his front lawn, and then he declares his house its own country. It's hilarious. It is like this biting satire, but very much appropriate for a younger audience. And the cover doesn't capture that at all. It really tells you nothing about the book, and it just feels like a poetry chapbook cover. So the good news is that they redesigned it later on when the author released an anthology, and I like the new cover much better. So does he. It's finally worthy of the book. So I assume if you're here, it's because you've either written a book or you're close to writing a book, or you think one day you might want to write a book. And the first question is whether you even need to worry about cover design. So if you've written a book, congrats. It's hard work. It's harder than designing a cover. And I can say this because I have done both. There's sort of two pathways. So if you're being published by a medium to large press, you're not going to have a lot of control over the cover design process, which can be really stressful for a lot of authors, but it's basically good news because you know that there's going to be a professional in charge, and your publisher's job is to sell as many copies as possible, which means doing the most effective book cover possible. But if you're being published by a small press or you're self-publishing, you do need to worry about your cover design a lot. You might have more control over the process, but you also have a lot more responsibility over the process. So I'll just talk briefly about how it works with a traditional press, because I've worked for a traditional press before. Your publisher will have either an in-house designer, or what's more likely these days is a stable of professional freelancers. Your designer is not going to read the book, almost certainly. What the publisher, or in a larger house, the art director is going to do is they're going to read the book, and they're going to create what's called a design brief that sort of summarizes the book, but also looks more at like the concept, the genre, the marketing strategy, and the audience. And then they're going to give that to the designer, and that's what the designer is going to read to do their magic. For everybody else, it gets a little bit more complicated. So a larger end of the small press might have an in-house designer or a freelancer and people that they trust that they work with, but most of them don't have the budget to have somebody full-time. So in a lot of cases, you might be left on your own to do your own cover. So maybe you know somebody with art or design skills who's willing to do it either for money or for trade. You can obviously hire a freelance designer yourself. You can buy a pre-made cover, or you can try and design your own book yourself. But as I said, I usually recommend against that unless you actually do have an arts background. So one of the big mistakes that I see with, and I'm going to focus mainly on independent authors, is they're not really sure what the book cover design is for. So they think about what's important to them about the book, which is the story and the characters and the setting. And they think about particular scenes or themes in the book that they really want to bring to life. The problem with that is that's going to work really well for a reader who has already read your book. But if you're actually trying to sell something, it needs to make sense to a reader who hasn't read your book yet. So, you know, if you've got your main character and they're beautifully depicted with the flowing auburn hair and they're holding a mysterious item of magic that is going to be the key to the whole thing as they face down the dragon, maybe that's great, but it's not going to make sense unless somebody knows who that character is. Book cover is a marketing tool, and it is your most important marketing tool. It is going to appear on everything that you put out. And it's meant to basically communicate four things: the genre of the book, the audience for the book, a little bit about the content of the book, and if you are building your career as an author, your author brand. There's a website called Cover Critics that I used to be a big fan of, and I still occasionally visit. And their slogan is "Nothing is more expensive than a bad cover." So this is the general recommendation on the SIFWA Discord, which I think is a really good starting point to understand what a book cover is doing. So this is called the comp grid system. And essentially you've got a grid of 9 and your cover is going to go in the middle of that. So the 8 other squares are for the covers of your comps. So if you haven't done the whole querying nonsense, your comps are books that have been published in the last 5 years that are similar to your book. So if readers like this book, they're going to like your book. You're generally looking for mid-list. So, you know, if you're famous, you don't need to worry about this. So you're not really comparing yourself necessarily to best-selling authors, but you're looking at sort of similar types of books to where you want to be in the market. So I made this little comp grid based on the nominees and winners of the Nebulas and Hugo Awards. And so if you look at this, you'll notice that there's not a lot that these have in common. They're all sci-fi or fantasy or horror, but there's not a lot of like visual similarity because they're all different markets and they're all different subgenres. So you wouldn't necessarily, you know, I loved Rake's Fall. That doesn't mean that I am the target audience for someone you can build a nest in, just on a glance. So it's not a very useful grid system. So I'm going to focus on one particular subgenre that's going to have all the same type of audience, which is romantasy, everybody's favorite genre to pick on. So right away, hopefully you can see that there's a lot more visual similarity between these 2 covers, or between these 8 covers. And I can start to draw kind of conclusions about what a romantasy cover looks like. They tend to be pretty dark, lots of blacks with like 1 or 2 kind of highlight covers. The covers tend to be very busy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of detail. There's about 2 fonts that get used. There's like 2 exceptions out of this grid. And in terms of what sort of imagery, there tends to be a lot more symbolic imagery versus character illustration. But there's 3 of these books have character illustration, so it's not quite half and half, but you know, you would probably be safe doing either. So moving along, let's look at a couple of covers and where they fit in here. So this is the mother of romantasy, Sarah Jane Maas, Throne of Glass. And so when I'm looking at this right away, my feeling is that it doesn't fit with the other ones. Now, she's a best-selling romantasy author, but there's a lot of visual difference in terms of the fonts used, the colors used, the style of imagery used. It just doesn't fit. So if I am Sarah Jane Maas, I probably don't care. If I'm an independent author, this is my heads up that I need to be revisiting this cover. So just to compare to that, this is another book, same title, but a variant cover. And this one you can see fits perfectly with everything else. So I like the comp grid system because it can tell you at a glance that something's wrong. But if you really want to improve your cover design, you need to know why that something is wrong. So what we're looking for mostly is image style, typography, color, and composition. And in terms of why these 2 variant covers exist, it's because they're aimed at different audiences. So this is what you're going to see when you hit somebody who's a commercial genre author who gets very, very popular. The publisher's going to start looking outside that audience for a new audience. So even though I said the second cover is, you know, fits in the genre more, is a little bit more successful, I like the first cover better. This is something that's aimed at an audience that's like me, that's a little bit more like upmarket and literary. And it's because they're trying to get her out of just that romantasy audience into that more, you know, speculative fiction literary audience. So genre is what kind of book it is. That's why that first cover I showed you did not work. You should be able to tell at a glance. So you want your cover to be similar enough that it's recognizable and different enough not to be cliche. And I always say that like this is a balance. And if you're going to err on one side, it's better to be cliche than to be confusing. Just so that people know what they're looking at. Like you don't want your book to get lost in the crowd, but you also don't want it to look so wildly different that no one's going to recognize it for what it is. So the tools at your disposal or your designer's disposal are things like imagery, typography, and color scheme. And those are going to work together to communicate genre. So on the right, you can see my hobby, which is designing book covers that are in the wrong genre. So I take famous books and I redesign them as if they were cookbooks or romances or business advice, like the Count of Monte Cristo down there. So here's another case study, again, used with permission of the author. So this is a friend of mine who posted the two covers that you see on the left and asked which one was better. He'd engaged some designers on Fiverr and he had a new book coming out and he wanted it to look pretty visually different than his previous books. So technically speaking, I would say there's not really anything wrong with either of those two covers. Like the font's nice, the color scheme's nice, they're eye-catching, but they don't tell me anything about the book genre. I kind of guessed, I'm like, are you writing murder mysteries set in Mexico because of the sugar skull? And the answer is no. So my first question wasn't which looks prettier, it's what kind of book is this? And it's actually like a realist fiction book about addiction and recovery and the punk scene. So I redesigned it, and that's my design that's on the right, which is the one that he ended up going with, where I was referencing specifically like punk imagery and tattoos because those play a big role in it. And I sort of muted the colors so that it looked like this is like serious realism. It's not particularly commercial. I think the book did pretty well. So the next question is audience. You want to think about who the primary readers of your book are. Are they children or adults? If they're children, what age of children? Because there's a wealth of difference between a book that's aimed at a 5-year-old and a book that's aimed at a 17-year-old. You want to think about the gender of your audience. Gender is a spectrum, but we usually think about an ideal reader and what their gender might be, whether your book is more literary or commercial. So this is an example, again, of the same book with variant covers. So how can you tell, and again, I'm going to try and get the chat up, which of these two covers is meant for children and which is meant for adults? My chat keeps disappearing. I don't know if people are saying anything in it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, top feels like a video game. Top book is YA. Yeah, you can tell immediately. So again, like the question is why? And a book can have multiple audiences. I mean, The Hobbit has pretty universal appeal. I read it as a little kid. I read it as an adult. I can still get something from it. But when you're working with a cover designer, you do want to target what that primary audience is. So the first one, you can tell it's aimed at young people because it is more illustrative, it's more colorful, it's got a dragon on it, and like a little kid's going to see that and want to pick it up. The second one really only makes sense if it's for an adult who has already read the book. So it's got a much more restrained color palette. It's a lot more mature looking. You don't have a dragon on it. You don't even have a hobbit on it. So this is something that is being marketed to adults who have nostalgia for a book that they read as a kid and don't want to be caught on the subway reading a book with a ridiculously kind of childish looking dragon on the cover. Although I don't see why not. I mean, I like the top cover too. So image is the first thing we think about. And that is the thing that if an independent author is going to spend money on for a cover, that's the first thing that they're going to think of in terms of spending money. But there's all kinds of imagery. We can take that same idea, like you know, a dragon, for example, and have a line drawing of the dragon that looks very sophisticated, or we could have like a CGI rendered three-dimensional dragon, and they're both going to communicate genre differently. So you can have photos, you can have illustrations, you can have painting, you can have drawing, you can have something that's more abstract or more representational. It's got to convey something about the book. So it might be a scene, it might be a symbol that's important, it might be a portrait of the main character. It might be something like kind of thematic to it. But the style of the image is actually the thing that's going to communicate most of all genre and audience. So illustration is your most expensive route if you're paying for it yourself. The more custom the illustration, the more expensive it is. And you know, you can use traditional media or you could use digital media. There's a little bit of a curve. So cartoony illustrations will tend towards children's and middle grade fiction. And then as your realism level increases, you're moving more towards like YA or commercial fiction. And then as you hit more adult or literary crowd, you're going to get less realism. There's a little bit of a shift happening with YA literature where they're going for a more stylized, abstracted type of aesthetic. And that's really because the market for YA books isn't primarily teenagers, it's people in their 30s and 40s who like that style. So one thing that gets overlooked a lot is public domain illustration. So if a work of art is public domain, as in it's been 75 years since the death of the artist, you can use it for free on your cover. That is totally fine. And I'm not sure why more designers don't go this route, because there have been a couple of really successful examples of this. I really like both of these covers because they're using the paintings pretty much unaltered, but they're pairing it with typography and colors that are very, very modern. And the effect to me is jarring. It makes me want to pick up the book and just find out what it's about to start off with. They're both kind of used in an ironic way. And I haven't read the first one, but the second one, it absolutely works. And the book is also great. So in addition to really old pieces, you can also use stock illustration from websites that are either free or licensable. Photography is always another option. So you can do custom photography, which is one of the things that I do, which will be a little bit more expensive. You can buy from stock photography sites, which will be cheaper, or use free images. You can use the original image or digitally alter it. This is really common in nonfiction, where you'll see kind of like an object that represents the main theme of the book, and then that object's going to be kind of isolated on the cover. You see it a little bit less in fiction. It can look cheap depending on the overall design. So, you know, I always say be careful, but don't rule out photography. There have been some great photo-based covers. Digital illustration is another thing. So 2D or 3D design. This can also include things like photo montage and Photoshop. This really is commercial fiction and YA. This is the main place that you're going to see digital illustration. And you can either commission it. There's a lot of artists who work in this style, or you can buy pre-made covers. So on to my favorite topic, which is typography, which I think, as somebody who has more of a design background than an illustration background, this is the most important part of a book cover. It is also going to communicate genre and audience. It is going to communicate the title of your book and your name. That's why it's the most important. So for the most part, it needs to work at a small size. And it should be related to the image rather than slapped on as an afterthought. I've been seeing a number of covers lately where the author has commissioned a really beautiful illustration and has not thought about type placement at all. And the type and the image are just fighting each other. There's all kinds of subtle ways that you can make just make your type stand out. So the one at the top, The Curious Rise of Alex Lazarus, I think is a really good example of like, it's a very simple design. It's a very common typeface, but the tilts in some of the letters just give it that sense of like somebody is holding up the weight of the world and everything is about to collapse. As with most things, you can break the rules. So the one that's kind of in the center, The Memory Police, this was one of my favorite books that I read a couple years ago. It's fantastic if you haven't encountered it yet. But it goes against everything that I just said. The type is really small. It's really hard to read, especially at a thumbnail size. And the only way that the designer could get away with this is knowing that the book itself and the publisher's marketing were going to be propping it up. So this is a book that as soon as people started reading it was going to be wildly successful. The publisher clearly knew that, and so they were able to break some of those rules because it's something that was going to be intriguing enough that you would have to look closely at it. So over my career, I've seen a lot of shifts in typography, and the big one is the movement from print design, which is what I started out doing, to online sales. So it's really unlikely these days that somebody is going to be browsing through a bookstore and come across your book, which means that when you're working with a designer, you always need to think about it in terms of digital sales and what is going to work at tiny little thumbnail sizes. Which means generally big, bold font. So you need to have your font be readable at scale, even if it covers the illustration. So this is the other kind of amateur thing that I see a lot, where somebody's like commissioned a really beautiful illustration, or maybe they have an art background and they've done a really beautiful illustration themselves, and they've kind of pushed the font either up to the top or down to the bottom or both to make sure that they don't cover anything important. And that's one of the biggest tells that a book design is not professional. It is better to cover part of the illustration. And it's better still to have your illustration and your text interact in some way. I think all of these do it pretty well, but you can even see, like, you know, the third version, the kind of middle version of Fahrenheit 451, the kind of thing that wouldn't work on Amazon these days because there's a lot of detail and it's very small. But they've even just done the little subtle thing of having his head overlap the text. And that's establishing a relationship between those two elements. So I think they all work really nicely. A lot of people complained about the 45th edition or the 45th anniversary edition of this book, but I think it's actually also a really effective cover. It's just looks very different to those old paperbacks that we all probably grew up with. Color is one of your most powerful tools in terms of genre and especially mood. In general, colorful, like full spectrum covers are going to skew to a younger audience. A more restrained palette is going to skew towards an older audience. That's starting to change in some interesting ways. One of the big trends I've noticed in the past couple of years is really, really vibrant literary sci-fi and fantasy novels, which is like a trend that I really like. Colors will also have different psychological associations, so we don't want to be like reductive about it, but generally chick lit's going to be in the pink, sky blue, and yellow range. Romance will tend to be in like the deep, rich red range, and so on. There was an interesting online controversy that I encountered that had to do with spicy romance books, which are increasingly being marketed the same way chick lit is. So you'll get these very illustrative covers with like a lot of pink and blue in them. And they absolutely look like they're marketed at a YA audience, but they are full of filthy sex scenes. And so there were a whole bunch of parents taking to social media complaining that they bought this book for their kids because it had a cute illustration on it. And it was just full of filthy stuff. So I'm watching that, wondering how this is going to play out in terms of industry trends. You should be aware of book cover cliches. I'm not too concerned about them. I feel like once you're aware of them, then it's over. But my illustrative example here is the colorful blob. This is basically what happens to women's fiction and upmarket fiction written by women of color, and they all kind of look the same, and everybody kind of hates it, but publishers keep doing it because one book with the cover like this was incredibly successful. And this kind of replaced the trend that's below, which is a woman facing away, which, you know, I've seen the same stock image on so many different covers that is essentially the back of a woman's head and neck. Again, it's like it exists for a reason, but it is also cliche because it's overused. So a couple modern trends. I mentioned the first one with the highly saturated colors, which I absolutely love. I think T. Kingfisher is a really interesting example because she's famous enough that her publisher knows that her books are going to sell no matter what, which means that there's a lot of variety in what they try with her covers. I just finished one of her books last night, which I thought had a terrible cover, even though it was a really good book. This one intrigues me a lot more because it looks like my kind of a thing. Floral designs are always really popular, especially with romance, because it subtly alludes to romance without being kind of too cheesy. Type forward designs that really prioritize the title and the author. Again, this is because of the Amazon thumbnail issue. And then the use of collage, which is something that I'm really happy to see coming back because I think it's a cool technique. There's been a lot of really successful books over the last couple of years that have used this. So I'll talk really briefly about the technical aspects of it. Different kind of books have different sizes. It's possibly obvious, but a shocking number of my clients needed to be told this. So you want to know when you're working with a designer, the format that the book's going to be published. So often there's multiple formats like ebook or paperback or hardcover. The designer's going to have to shift things around for each of those formats. And even when you're going between, let's say, Ingram and Amazon KDP, you can have a book that's exactly the same size, but the template for it will be different because they're using different types of paper. So you do not need to become an expert in this, but the terms that you should know are spine width. So this is determined by the page count and the type of paper. And it's going to, like I said, it's going to change. So that's really important. The trim size. So this is the actual final physical dimensions of your book. And then the bleeds. So on the illustration, you can see that there's this sort of blue outline. And that's because you need your image to extend past the cover so that when the machine slices it, you're not getting like an awkward white streak. At this point, most presses and print-on-demand platforms are going to have templates. If you can figure that out and throw your designer a template, they will love you forever. It just makes it a lot easier to know that specific printer or publisher specifications. Everybody asks about money. It's like the most common thing that I get asked is how much does any of this cost? And my answer to that is, well, what kind of cover do you need? Because what I charge for a stock photography piece with some cool text on it is very different than what I would charge for a custom illustration. So these are just some kind of ballpark figures, 90 to 200 for a pre-made cover. Again, depending on like the contract with the company that makes it. So sometimes they'll say you buy the cover and they never reuse that cover. And other times you buy the cover and 5 other authors in your genre are also using that cover. So that can account for some of the price discrepancy. For somebody like me who does not need, you know, this type of work to eat, $300 to $500 is pretty reasonable. You're not going to get custom illustration for that probably, but you'll get something that looks professional and hopefully marketable. A more experienced high-end designer might be charging like $600 and up. And if you're going to get that really cool custom art illustration, you're looking usually at several $1,000s. If you're self-publishing, you know, those custom art types of covers are very, very striking, but your cover is only part of the story. So, you know, if the algorithm for whatever reason decides that it doesn't like your book or you don't really have a marketing plan, sinking thousands of dollars into a cover might not make sense. Like you just might not make that back. So you want to consider the style that you want, but also kind of project where that payoff is going to be. Like, are you actually going to be able to sell enough to make it worthwhile? There's a lot of negotiations. So the one rule is that reputable designers will not work on spec. So working on spec means that you start the work before you see the money. We all know from experience that if you don't have a deposit, you're never going to see any of the money. So you will always be expected to be paying up front. Most designers will want a contract. That'll include things like payment, pay periods, timeline, because a designer is typically juggling a bunch of jobs, how many concepts you get. So the standard is 3, how many revisions you get. So if you want something changed, you know, is that your designer going to allow you infinite changes or like 3 changes? And there's a lot of back and forth, which is totally okay. I would rather my clients tell me what they want changed than have a cover that they're unhappy with. So I like a lot of dialogue and collaboration. But you know, you'll want to get to know the person that you're working with and see kind of what works for you and what works for them. In terms of what you get for that. So you'll get some kind of a discussion, hopefully, of your concept, your vision, and your style. If you don't get that, you are not working with a reputable book designer. Pinterest is being an amazing tool for just being able to show somebody visually what it is you're looking for. And I don't know a single designer who doesn't appreciate like a good Pinterest board of your concept. You'll have a discussion about the size and specs. So are you just getting a front ebook cover or a full wrap? Are you using Kindle Direct Press? Are you using print on demand? Are there multiple sizes? That kind of thing. You'll often get multiple concepts and thumbnails. Again, that's something that you want to figure out ahead of time. Some kind of a mock-up. So especially if they're doing custom illustration or custom photography, they'll often be kind of a rough so that they're not wasting all this time adding detail when you want major changes. And then a lot of designers will specify how many changes that they want or that they'll allow. And then the other things that you get, so you get your final files, which will be print ready PDFs. So that's what you would send to the printer, or that's what you would send to Amazon. And then you would get JPEGs and PNGs, which are smaller files that you would use for like your social media, your author website, any of your publicity stuff. You're going to get these in the formats that you specify. So if you know that Amazon needs a certain format or your printer needs a certain format, you want to have that up front. And then if you think that you might have to do something else with it later, it's a good idea to have that discussion. So for example, when I designed my cover, my publisher had a hardcover in mind. And so what he did was he took my my paperback and stretched it into a hardcover. And like, no, you can't do that. So if you think you might do a hardcover edition with the same visuals, or you think you might want to do an animated cover, which are kind of increasingly popular now, have that talk right at the beginning. A lot of designers throw out their files. I don't. I have a thing in the closet that has a terabyte drive with all of my old designs on it because I once had an author who passed away and the publisher wanted to reprint the book, and I fortunately had it on the terabyte drive, so now I do it for everything. But not every designer does that. So you know, I have a policy that I don't give the Photoshop files to a client because I don't want them making changes to it if they don't know what they're doing. So you just want to have that discussion before you get too far in the process. And then, of course, you want to make sure that the designer at least knows what the book is about. So they may not read your book. They probably won't read your book. I design I've got my own big to be read list. I try and read the books, but I don't always. But you know, you get disasters like this, especially with public domain books. Like anybody can publish an edition of a modern proposal, but some people shouldn't. Okay, so where do you find a designer? So pre-mades are very easy to find. You just Google pre-made book plus whatever genre, and you're going to find a ton. Again, you want to find out what their rules are around reuse. Reedsy has a list of vetted book designers and some really great information on what to look for. And the nice thing about them too is often their designers will go on YouTube and give talks. And so you can get a sense of like what that person's style is, which I really like. And they're also just really entertaining to watch. Um, I'm in Ontario, so we have a registered graphic designers directory. I don't know if there's one where you guys live. I'm not a big fan because a lot of them aren't book designers, so they might be great, but it's not really clear from the directory necessarily like what they do. And you can have somebody who's like a great web designer, but they don't know what they're doing with books. But designers don't make a lot of money, so they'll probably still do your book. Um, Fiverr, I really side-eye Fiverr. I've seen some very sad stories. I think you get what you pay for with them. So if you're on a really limited budget, I mean, maybe, but you know, I don't think their designers are great or they would charge more. Um, Behance and 99 Designs, I think, are really good sites. They're portfolio based. So that can be useful because you can see what the designer has done and whether or not that fits with your vision. And then, so like, I don't expect anybody to become an expert in book design unless they want to do this for a living. But I do think that it helps authors to at least have some education in it and some vocabulary around it. So my three favorite sources for learning more, Catherine Rosen Miller is really fun. So she's a designer and blogger. And on her blog, she'll redesign covers of books that you've probably heard of or maybe not. And she'll go through her entire process. So from her concept doodles to her final pieces and sort of walk you through why she makes the decisions that she makes. And I think her work is really good and gives a good example of like the inside of somebody's mind as they're going through this process. Cover critics, I mentioned earlier, I used to be a really big fan because I like snarky things on the internet. And so what this is a forum where you can take your design and upload it to this forum and everybody gets to comment on it. And they'll just be brutal and tear it apart. So I find that kind of thing fun to read. My criticism of them is that they've really leaned hard into AI design, and for whatever reason, these guys are just you know, distracted by the shiny, and they're recommending AI design for everything, and I think it looks terrible and is just a general societal ill. So I take their advice with a grain of salt. And then my third one and favorite one is it's Divya, who is an Instagram book blogger and a YouTube personality. She is a graphic designer, and her videos are like these really funny parodies of trends in graphic design. So she'll take audience suggestions like make a romance book or make a horror book, and again go through the process of how she would do a design, but with, you know, a lot of humor and snark. So, you know, her videos are just fun to watch in general, but you'll learn a lot about the process. And that's about it. I'm going to leave my information up, but I would love to hear your questions. And if you have anything like specific that you are wondering about the stuff, yeah, I'm interested in what you have to say.
Hmm.
Yeah, just have at it. It's a small group.
Hello, Rachel. My name is Peter. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's the best of its kind I've seen.
Oh, thank you.
So two things. First, I'm really struck by what is, I see it, the tension between making a book cover that fits in with your genre versus a basic act of selling things is standing out. So I have a visual image of, say, a field of daisies, and there's one red tulip. I'm going to be drawn to the tulip. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. I think about that a lot. And I thought about it a lot when I was designing my own books. And also, I do this most when I'm designing for small press because the audience for small press is really, really different than a commercial audience. So, yeah, I mean, you want your book to stand out for sure, but you don't want to, you know, if somebody is looking for roses and they come across your field of daisies, and then they see that red tulip and it's the only red thing, but they're not looking for a red tulip, they're looking for roses. So you don't want to create the kind of confusion in the reader that's going to direct them in the wrong place. So for me, I always like to look at what the standard is, what the cliche is, and throw a twist on it. So, and this is very, very tricky. So like, for example, when I was looking at, I did an epic fantasy novel last year, and I didn't like I don't like the covers of a lot of epic fantasy, and this one was a lot more literary. So I wanted to have like the mythic battle figures on it, and griffins, and like there were dirigibles and things like that. So I wanted to have those elements on it so that it was immediately recognizable as a fantasy novel. But I also wanted to signal somehow that it was different. And so I ended up using like this entirely new software to me. Like I 3D modeled the entire thing. It's probably my most successful cover, I think, visually. And there was enough there that it still said epic fantasy, but it was different enough that it was like saying, well, okay, it's epic fantasy, but not like that other thing that you read. It's gonna be better. Um, so that's
Okay.
just, it's not always a balance that I hit, but it's a balance that's always the balance that I'm aiming for.
Okay, that's helpful. So would you be willing to take a look at a mock-up of a cover that I've created, and then you can tell me everything that's wrong with it?
Oh, I'd love to. I love doing that. Okay.
Uh, is there time to screen share it now, or should I email it to you?
Um, that would be a question for our lovely hosts.
I
Give them
think
a
that's
thumbs
a
up.
great idea.
So at the moment, I think you need to make me a co-host to be able to screen share.
I don't know that I can, but maybe I can. I cannot. I do not have that power. I think Morgan's gonna have to do it.
You're muted,
Anyone should
Morgan.
be able to share.
Okay. All right. So you're ready?
Yep.
Of course, I could tell you all the thought that went into this, but I'm not going to do that. You're just going to look at it and be brutal, right?
Yes. I can try. I try and be nice. I really do.
Okay, here goes.
Okay. All right. So I'm guessing nonfiction. It's got a really clean layout, which is definitely what you want. So I don't offhand, nothing is like a horrible deal killer. I would never.
You just made my day.
But so I think a couple things to consider. The title isn't really doing much for it. So I talked a little bit about the interaction between title and image. And with this, I just see a lot of white space. So one thing that you could do is just EMDR huge, stories kind of like the same thing underneath, and have the figure sort of overlap it. And then I would maybe reduce the size of the subtitle a little bit, just so that it's the title that is the most obvious, then your name, and the image. So I might look at like the overall layout, just kind of like your use of space. Just speaking as a reader, I don't know what EMDR is, so I'd want some kind of an indication, unless that's just something that I'm not supposed to know. But again, it's like how niche you want to be. So I might look at like the title. I think the image is kind of cool. You could go for a little bit more contrast. I don't know if that's something that you've made yourself or gotten an artist to do, but I'm losing a lot of the details. There's like these beautiful details of like the folds and like the legs and the fingers. Yeah, there's a lot of really, really nice details that I don't see yet at a smaller size. And you could just sort of thicken those lines a little bit or make the image a little bit bigger. And then the last thing that I'd say is white covers are really controversial. Um, Yeah, people don't like them. I think I've done like 2 white covers in my life, because usually authors want it changed, and like when I look at it, I want it changed. The main reason is that they get lost when you're scrolling through, um, because the background of the website, like Amazon or whatever that you're looking at, it is also going to be white. So you kind of have to do this line around it to differentiate it from the background, and that looks cheap. So even like a solid color or a gradient, it can be really subtle, but that's going to help just give it that visual boundary. But I think you're on the right track.
Fair enough. So you didn't hate it.
Didn't hate it, no.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Welcome. Sorry, we've got some company here.
So I have a question about that book cover. It was all one font.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's a good question.
and to me it felt like there wasn't enough tension because it was all one font. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it really depends on the book. I'm a lot more forgiving of that in nonfiction than I am in fiction. The rule that I was taught in school is 3 fonts maximum, which I think can be boring. It really, really depends on the type of book. I will normally go for 2 fonts, so I will go for like one font for the title that is really striking, usually a little bit more like fancy. Um, and then I'll go for a much simpler font for everything else that's on there. And you want to make sure that they pair well. So yeah, that is actually something that you could consider to make it a little bit more visually interesting. Is if you wanted like one big bold font for the title, and then maybe like a serif font for the subtitle and the author. But yeah, like this is another thing that will tend to signal genre a fair bit is font choice. Like going back to the romantasy example, because I find the covers for them really fun. There are 2 fonts that they use, and one is kind of like a simple sans serif font, and the other one is that like swishy sort of very romantic looking font, and they're both super iconic, and they combine really well. Like it's a cliche because it works. So yeah, no, I have a lot of like typeface opinions. My big visual thing though is having, making sure that there's some sort of interaction or relationship between the image and the font, and that's usually kind of weaving part of the image and the font together. I think it looks really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. This is so helpful. Really great. I noticed that you didn't mention Book Baby, and I seem to be on their radar. They send me things constantly, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about them.
This is the first that I've heard of them.
Oh,
I'll have to check them out. What do they do?
well, I attended one of their workshops online, and it was about book cover design. But then when I looked back, they do offer a full range of services. But yeah,
Oh, so they're like a publishing services company?
um, yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I used to work for one, full disclosure, so I'm not against them. There's sort of a sliding scale between publishing services and vanity press. And so I would just do my research. So
Mhm,
the
mhm,
company that I worked for basically would work with independent and small press authors to do like book design, layout, editing, that kind of thing. And
mhm,
it was like very upfront. It was very clear that like we were not the publisher, we weren't marketing the book, we were helping authors self-publish. And I think that kind of thing is very legit, very useful. And if you've got like a good company, then that can be a really good option for a self-published author. But there's more money in vanity press and publishing scams than there is in publishing. If you want to make money, it's not going to be as an author. It's not going to be as a designer. It's going to be, yeah, Steven says, always check writer beware. Yes, yes, yes. It's going to be in scamming people by pretending to be a publisher when you're not. And so I would just look into what they do, you know, examples of their work, you know, see what their covers look like for one thing. And yeah, Writer Beware is an incredible resource that has helped me and helped a number of my author friends because like a lot of these companies look very professional.
Thank you.
Rachel, could I just ask again what the criterion is for using something in the public domain?
That largely depends on your country, and depends on the Disney Corporation, and there's been quite, but the rule of thumb is 75 years after the death of the author. And you can, or the artist in this case. So you can go to Public Domain Review, which is a wonderful site, and it will tell you not only if the artwork is in the public domain, but which countries, because different countries have different copyright laws. So before I use something, I mean, I tend to, when I do use public domain art, I tend to go for something that is like hundreds of years old, because I think that that hits the ironic thing the best. Yeah, Creative Commons is another good one. So you can just, you know, make sure that in your country and in probably any other English speaking country, assuming that like we're not going for translation here, just make sure that that is in the public domain for all of them, and you're good to go. The one thing
What about photographs?
yeah, so the one thing that I would caution with that is that you can have a piece of art that is public domain, but the photo of the piece of art may not be public domain, depending on what the piece of art is. So you do want to watch for that. Wikipedia, though, of all places, will give you really, really high quality public domain scans of artwork, and that has a Creative Commons license, so you are totally allowed to use it.
Okay.
Photos are the same. So photos after again, I think in the States it's 75 years since the death of the photographer, should be public domain. They'll, you know, with
Okay.
anything, there'll be a little bit of wiggle room. So, you know, I'm a big fan of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht, Three Penny Opera writers. And Three Penny Opera recently came into the public domain, but much, much later than it should have because of the estates of, I believe it's the Kurt Weill's estate. So you'll have the odd thing where there's a little bit of controversy or somebody has challenged that entry into the public domain. But it's something that you can usually find out pretty quickly because
Okay.
there's people like me who just check these sites all the time and get really excited when a piece of art that they like is now free to use.
Well, I wrote my story in Edith Wharton's house.
Oh, wow.
And so I want to have, I'm envisioning a collage type cover, but I'd like to use a picture of her. And
Mhm.
I don't want to find out after it's done that, oh yeah, you can't use that.
Betsy, hi Betsy, it's Diana.
I know, hi.
Hi, you know what? You have lots of buds in the mount, and all you have to do is show them the picture and ask if it's okay. You've got all sorts of resources for using Edith's pictures, I think. So
Okay.
not to worry. They'll tell you. They may even give you, you know, they love you. They may even give you special permission to use pictures for your book. So
Well, and I wouldn't be opposed to taking advantage of that. So.
Yeah, I mean, that can help with your marketing too. I mean, I had the coolest experience. So in my latest book, I use a quote from Dennis Lee. I don't know how famous Dennis Lee is in the US. Do you guys have alligator pie? No? Oh, oh, this is the problem with the US. Um,
The
just
only problem?
yeah, just that one. No, he's a fantastic, like everybody in Canada knows. Mostly known as a children's poet, but he also wrote this beautiful poetry for adults. And he's still alive. So I wanted to use a quote from one of his poems, and my publisher just emailed and they said, yeah, of course use that. That's great. Like we love that you're into him. So if you have contacts with like the estate or you know, anybody who would be involved as a copyright holder, it's usually a thing that benefits them as well. Because then they have an incentive to promote your work. So
Great. Thank you. This was fabulous.
thanks.
I could say a few words about working with small publishers. I've published about 25 books with small publishers, and one of them or two of them are like sole proprietors, where like they you know, they think they can develop a cover, and at first I was like, okay, I can go with that. But then there was one that he had a book designer. And so he would send me like, I don't know, 8 concepts. And usually I hated all of them. And so then I would immediately turn to my family and be like, what should I do? I don't know what to do with this cover. And I would gather some ideas, come up with a concept and send it back to him and say, can you do something with this? And then I would get something that I liked back. So the one advantage of having a book designer I also found was that the interior of the book always looked really good,
Hmm.
better than the other books by the sole proprietor, small publishers. So I guess my thing is like, you don't take what you don't have to take what they're giving you. Use your resources, brainstorm ideas until you find something that feels really satisfying, and eventually you can get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've had that experience too. A lot of the people that I've worked with, both in terms of my own writing, but also clients, are sole proprietors, or maybe like it's 2 or 3 people. And there's a lot of people out there who think that they can do a design. And I've had that bad experience where the publisher has kind of a house style and they want to keep with that style. And in this case, this was a slightly unhinged person, and I kind of volunteered to, you know, do a little bit of critique or even come up with a cover. And I was sort of shut down with one of them. But most recently, I had that happen where, again, it's like a 2-person business and they're pretty prolific, and they came up with a cover and I said, okay, but have you thought about this in terms of the market? And presented them with an alternative that they absolutely loved. So, you know, there is room for negotiation. Like, nobody's making money in the small press world. So it is in their best interest and your best interest that the books sell. And so if you have a successful cover, your book is more likely to sell. That's good for you. That's good for them. So I always try and leave my ego at the door, which is challenging because I have a huge ego. But you know, you want to approach it in terms of like, okay, well, this is the type of book it is, and this is what's selling as this type of book, and here's where I feel like this misses the mark. And I want both of us to do well. You know, you want those small 1 or 2 people presses to become larger presses. And I've actually seen a client go through that, where it started as 1 person and now it's like a medium-sized press that's getting all kinds of critical acclaim and they get nominated for all kinds of awards, and it's great. But it's because of that sort of commercial sensibility and being aware of where the market was at. And, you know, the fact that they hired me as a book designer, obviously. You're muted.
Are there any trends that you're seeing that you think are either really great or that we should be kind of wary of in terms of book covers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love the super fluorescent, brightly colored maximalist covers that we're seeing now. I don't know why. A lot of people hate them. I think they're so great. They just catch my eye. The book that I showed you guys earlier, Rake's Fall, is a really good example of that, where I love this author's work. He's writing directly to me. But I thought that the cover of his first book was terrible. Saint of Bright Doors. I thought it was like a really boring cover for how much I love the book, and I wouldn't have even picked it up because it was just like, oh, it's a city. That's great. It's a door. It's the most cliche thing that you can imagine. Whereas I think that that really, really fluorescent, like over the top, sort of hallucinogenic cover that's bright pink, and you don't often see bright pink in a book by a male author. That just drew me right in. Like, it's just really interesting. So I really like that trend a lot. I really like the animated cover trend. That's something that I want to get in on. So that is books that when you click on them, they do a thing. There's a lot you can do with like augmented reality, and most book sales are online. So that is something that you can do really easily with something that's viewed online primarily. So I really like that trend. In terms of things that I don't like, I am a little sick of what I think looks like clip art everywhere. I see that in a lot of literary fantasy and romantasy books. So I mentioned that there was a T. Kingfisher book that I just finished, A Sorceress Comes to Call, which I thought the book was amazing, but the art on the cover to me looked like random clip art plopped everywhere, and I don't know why the publisher did it. This is nominated for a Hugo. It's like a fantastic book, and it was just the most kind of generic clip arty cover that I've seen. Um, I I really hate AI. And I go off vibes. If I feel like I'm not gonna like a book, I start to zoom in to see like, oh, is this cover AI? I bet it's AI. I bet I can tell. That's happened a couple times. And it's just, to me, it's like, it's not just like putting me out of work. It's just lazy, and it's ugly, and it's like destroying the environment. And I just feel like we can do better as a society. I would honestly rather just see like somebody pop up like a plain black rectangle with a title on it than resort to that. I have other AI rant. I can rant about AI. I just had an article published in our local paper yesterday about how much I hate AI.
What is it that tips you off that the cover was done with AI?
Well, it's kind of like the same as the rules for when you're wandering into the fairy kingdom. So you want to check the teeth, check the shadows, check the ears, count the fingers. And if any of those seem wrong, it's probably AI. No, like I'll look at illustration details, especially text. AI doesn't do text very well. And the thing is I just looked at an AI cover actually before I came on here. And you could tell because the person knew enough to know that AI doesn't do text very well. And they had like a sign in their design, but they didn't have any skills, or they wouldn't have been using AI in the first place. So they had taken the sign, they'd taken the text that the AI had done that would have been all mangled, and they had just plopped their own typography, and it wasn't in perspective. So, like, oh, okay, they did a really bad job with that. And then you can just see like where things are attached to other things. So buttons are a really good indicator. If somebody has like a button or a zipper on their clothing or a pocket, it's not going to line up the way you think it's going to be, and it's going to kind of melt. So Yeah. That's like my dark hobby. Like my positive contribution hobby is making these wrong genre book covers that hopefully people find amusing. And my dark hobby is looking at images by authors that I dislike or publishers that I don't think very highly of and trying to
I thought I was muted. I didn't mean to laugh.
No, that's great. I love feedback.
Well, I can think of another question, but I'm conscious there's some people who haven't asked one yet. I don't know if anyone else would like to.
I think you can go for it.
Okay. So this is one of those impossible questions, but it's about choosing your battles with covers that you don't like. So I remember hearing some science fiction, pioneering science fiction writer of color, the cover the publisher chose showed white people on the cover, even though the characters were black. Or I remember hearing Judy Blume say that when she wrote "Hello God, It's Me, Margaret," she had in mind a girl with brunette hair, and the publisher made the first cover a girl with blonde hair because they said it would sell better. So just, do you have any thoughts about, choosing your battles of things like that as an author?
Oh yeah. So I actually just saw a controversy like that. So I think the author you might be thinking of is Ursula K. Le Guin, who wasn't black, but all of her characters in Wizard of Earthsea were black or brown. And all of the covers for that book had white people on the cover. And she raised a fuss and got overruled. But just today, or not today, but like this week in 2025, I saw a black author, not they didn't make her characters white, but they made her characters light skinned. And it was very important to her that the characters were dark skinned because she is dark skinned, and the place that like the world in which it's set, they would be dark skinned. And so she had a fight, which fortunately I think she did win that fight. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question because the rationale that Ursula K. Le Guin was given was that having a brown kid on the cover of Wizard of Earthsea wouldn't have sold as many books. And she was very deliberate in terms of how she wrote it. You don't find out until about halfway through the book that the main character is brown. Um, she wants you to fall in love with this character, fall in love with this world, and then you, the presumably white young male viewer, are about to have the rug pulled from under you. I think as a designer in that situation, I would just not have the characters on the cover. Like there's a dragon in that book, I'd probably show the dragon. Yeah, I mean, there's weird hills on which we will all die, and I tend to go more for kind of like a symbolic or metaphorical representation. I don't really like books that have the character on the cover in a way that you can see what their face looks like. It's not my favorite thing. I think that it tends to date the book and look really tacky. So I would rather see like a symbol or a little bit like more of a coy posing so that I don't have the illustrator or the photographer's idea of exactly like what that character looks like. Um, but I mean, I would be sad if my characters got whitewashed. Um, yeah, I think you do have to balance the marketing end of it with the faithfulness to the book, and I will often prioritize the marketing end of it. There's sort of a cover that I'm working on now where we found the perfect historical public domain image. It's just vibe wise, it absolutely fits. And it's not exactly how the characters look, but we've both the author and I feel like that's just fine. It's good enough and it's funny enough that people are gonna want to pick it up because of that. But yeah, I mean, Fortunately, the world of publishing is a little bit more diverse than it was in the 70s, and I want to believe that there are fewer of those fights happening, but like I said, I know that there are still those fights happening now. And I always hope that authors are successful enough that they can push back and push those boundaries and be like, yeah, no, my book with a dark-skinned protagonist is going to sell. I'm going to make it sell, and I'm going to make it more of a thing. I don't know if that answers your question.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the notes that Stephen's saying that music is different, and yeah, the music industry is so strange because you can record a cover of anything, but you can't quote a song lyric in a book without the record company's permission. I've never really understood that. I'm aware of the copyright issues around writing and art because that's what I do, but yeah, music is its whole other thing.
I have published several essays in various online journals, and I have used song lyrics. And I was told by an attorney that if you give credit to the author of the lyrics and or the performer, it's okay to use them. I took that as gospel.
Sure.
And
I mean, yeah, like we erred on the side of caution with my stuff. I cut any lyrics references, and the one poet that I quoted, as I said, we contacted his publisher and no problem at all. I haven't really heard of anybody getting in trouble for it, but I was advised to not do.
to be, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could say like, okay, well, if the record company comes after me and sues, this is notoriety for my book. And I have absolutely picked up books because the author has either been sued or has been threatened with a lawsuit by somebody I don't like. And um, you can make it work for you. But
Well, I didn't make any money off of
Yeah.
these, so if they want to sue me because my husband and I were singing "Love Me Do," and I included some of the lyrics. Well, anyway, thank you. I will stow my legal advice for future pieces of work.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's true. Because there's certainly like times that I have really wanted to use a song lyric in there, like quoted a song lyric as an epigraph, and then I had to take it out. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good to know.
I find it really ironic that in the age of AI, which is just like mass plagiarism, people are still getting challenged over a quote or using a concept that's a little bit too close to somebody else's concept.
So we're almost at an hour and a half. Does anyone have any last questions before we give our wild thanks to Rachel? That was so wonderful and so helpful. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad I could be helpful. Yeah, my mission in life is like friends don't let friends have bad covers, and I'm here to hopefully fix that. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, our pleasure.
Thanks, Rachel.
Take care, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Everybody. So Stephen's on the program committee with me.